First of all, I'll tell you a little bit about myself and my background. About 34 years ago, I started with an intellectual interest in life after death. And I don't know why, because I had no bereavement, no sadness, just an intellectual interest. And I'll skip all the things I did to begin with. Anyway, I became very intrigued by it intellectually. And like a certain gentleman called Victor Zammit, I am all about the evidence. What is the evidence for this? What is the evidence for that? Now, I am nothing special. I'm just an ordinary university lecturer, teacher, nothing special at all. But I think I have a very common sense, logical mind. And I have absolutely no psychic abilities whatever, which is really good, because it means that I can be dispassionate about whatever I come across. Now, so that's how I got into this. And then Archie Roy and I did lectures at the university together. We went out on spontaneous cases. And probably most of you know this. Once you start opening your mind to these things come in your wake. Suddenly, you're offered a case of reincarnation, you've offered a case of this poltergeist, and things happen because you've sent out that thought that you would like things to happen. Now, I never, ever thought, ever, if you'd asked me 30 years ago, would I be doing this and have written 3 books, I would have said, no, you're absolutely mad. But there we go. So Professor Archie Roy, he died in 2012. But I really hadn't seen him since 2010 because he had Alzheimer's. And we had all these lectures which we'd contrived together, mostly me, I have to say, for the university. And I thought, I have all this information. Now, my main raison d'etre is to let the man in the street, the people that don't know any of the things you know, to let people know these things happen. And it's a sin not to share it with people. So that was why the first book was born, with all the stuff I more or less already had, plus my own experiences. Wendy, I think, missed out the bit about the sense of humor in my books, but there's also a lot of actual information there as well. So it's a blend. There even might be the odd naughty word in it as well, but that's okay. That's life. I investigate things that happen to real people in real life. And tonight we're going to speak about what is the evidence, not just mediumship, what is the evidence that our consciousness survives after physical death? And let's face it, that's the biggest question you can ask in the whole world. Is there any evidence? How good is the evidence? Now, I'm telling you right away, I will speak about the good evidence. I'm not going to speak about the poor evidence that skeptics like to talk about. There's no point in that. Now, as far as evidence is concerned, let's look at a few different topics. Now, I can only touch on these topics because each one is in depth in one or other of the books. Most of you, some of you may not have heard of the term, the drop-in communicator in mediumship. That is when a group of people might get together, you might have a weekly session in your house, you might be anywhere at all, and you have a regular session of mediumship. I don't care what kind, if it's trance, mental mediumship, it doesn't matter. But there can be many occasions when you're sitting in your circle, we'll call it a circle, and you're quite happy to hear from your husband, your child, whatever, and suddenly through the medium, there comes a person, a personality, a consciousness from someone that nobody knows. The medium doesn't know this person. All the people in the room don't know this person. And quite frankly, sometimes they were considered a bit of a nuisance because they wanted to hear from their families and friends. But there are so many of these statements of drop-in communicators. Very quickly, I'll name 4. We can't go into depth, but I'll give you an idea. One of the most excellent drop-in communicators, I think it's in my first book, I'm not sure. In the disaster of the Airship, R101 in 1930 or so, the people perished terribly because the government forced them to go and they shouldn't have gone. That is the bottom line. Anyway, they had a dreadful, it went over the channel and it went on fire over the channel, and everybody was destroyed in that. It was a dreadful thing. However, I'm reading some notes I've written here. 3 days later, some people had gone for a sitting with Eileen Garrett, uh, and one wonderful sitter, Eileen Garrett. And in the middle of these, this is a private sitting, came through people they didn't know. And it turned out that it was the names of the people, some of the people who were on the crew of the R101. And the first thing they said was, we're murderers, we're all bloody murderers, all these people, because they should never have taken off. Everybody that went on it knew they shouldn't, but the government forced them to do it. And then around about the same time that these people got the word of the R101, another 3 people were in another group, and the same people tried to come through to them. Now, I'm not going to expand on this, because once they found out these people were coming through, some people from the Air Ministry, etc., went to different mediums, and they got such a wealth of information that the only Captain Irwin, for example, he gave such detail about the airship, etc., that there's no doubt. The man that did the communications, he gave details about communications. The structural engineer gave details about the structure, and so on and so forth. And there was absolutely no doubt, using their names and everything, that these people from the R101 were coming through different mediums. Now, as I say, nobody knew that. They didn't want to hear from the people in the R101. So that's one case. Then we have the case that you might know about Runke in Iceland. The man had died, it was something like 58 years earlier. And Runke had died, and you're laughing because you know the story. Anyway, Runke had lived in a particular house, and he died drunk, actually. He was drinking at the beach and he drowned. However, about 58 years later, a man had moved into Runke's old house, and he was interested in spiritualism. So they decided to have these circles in the same house. And then who was coming through the house was Runke. And the people didn't know who he was, but he said, I'm Runald Runofsson, and he gave his name, he gave where he lived, he gave where he died, and he gave a lot of specific information. And they said, well, why are you here? And he said, because I want my leg back. And they said, your leg back? What do you mean you want your leg back? And it turned out that when they found his body, one of his legs was missing. It had been dashed upon the rocks or something like that. Now, Icelandic people were very religious, very Christian religious, and they believe if your body's not whole, then you can't move on to the spirit world. Anyway, they said, we don't have your leg. He said, yes, you do. If you look inside, between the man that had moved in had added another wall to the building. He said, if you look in between the outer wall and the inner wall at a certain place in the house, take out the piece of wall and you'll find my leg lying between the 2 walls. And they said, what? Anyway, they did it. And sure enough, they opened it up, and there they found Runke's leg in there. Now, we don't actually know how it got there. We presume it had been washed up at some point and somebody had put it in there for some particular reason. And then after that, Runke was so grateful, he became one of the controls of the group and came through and helped them. So there's another drop-in communicator. A British one was Harry Stockbridge. He was in the forces, and Harry Stockbridge died, I think it was about 1915, in the First World War. And there's a man called Dr. Alan Gold from the British Society, the London Society for Psychical Research. And Alan Gold did a lot of work on these drop-in communicators. Now, Harry Stockbridge came through the circle. It doesn't matter what the circle was. And he told them that his name was Harry Stockbridge, what regiment he was in, where he had died, how he had died, and that the government had a war memorial up to him, but they had the wrong date of his death on it. And of course, once they established it was this man, Alan Gold took it upon himself to, once he read the transcripts of the circle readings, he went to the Air Ministry, the War Ministry, and he did everything he could to find out the actual date of Harry Stockbridge's death. And Harry Stockbridge was right. The date that was on the war memorial was wrong, and the date that the spirit person came to give the circle was absolutely right, once they checked the records with the War Museum and the war people. So that was an amazing one. And on a sort of, I won't say a lighter note, there were in a circle, there was a man called Gustav Adolf Biedermann came through, and he really was a pest. He was rambunctious, he was cheeky, and the people in the circle said, you know, we don't want you. And he gradually mellowed and gave details of himself, so much so that they could then, and then Alan Gaul checked it all later because he's very, very fastidious. And he went away and he found there was a man called Gustav Adolf Biedermann, and every detail he had given the circle was absolutely correct. Now that's what I call drop-in communicators. And to me, drop-in communicators give some of the best possible evidence because it's not mind reading from the medium, it's not mind reading for anyone in the room, and the detail is such that it can't, the information must have come from somewhere. And the only place it could have come from was the consciousness of these people who had actually died. And the interesting thing was a lot of them knew, for example, Harry Stockbridge with the wrong name. Harry Stockbridge knew after his death, he knew that they'd put up the wrong date on the war memorial. And that tells us something. That tells us that they really do know. If they want to know, they really do know what's going on in the earth plane, we'll call it that, after their actual death. Now that's actually very important because a lot of skeptics say, oh no, it's mind reading, you're tuning into an Akashic record somewhere, downloading a library. Not so. It's live, it's ongoing, and to me, the drop-in communicator is one of the most marvelous things that proves the survival of consciousness. Another thing that actually happens sometimes is some people become earthbound and they don't know they're dead. And very often you can have people come in, they can talk to the people who are earthbound and encourage them to go. And it can be actually shown in many cases that they've actually gone. The atmosphere changes in the place where they're earthbound. And why they're stuck here, I don't know. And don't worry, everyone, it doesn't happen very often. It usually happens in some sort of traumatic deaths. Now, I know a lot of people don't like the idea of reincarnation, but that's too bad because there are so many children worldwide, over 3,000, 4,000 children worldwide, who from when they can speak of a previous life. Now, that's not just in the Indian countries, the Middle East, it happens all over European countries, everywhere. Quite a lot in America, actually. And you probably all know the work of Jim Tucker and at the University of Virginia. And Jim Tucker and Bruce Grayson have an amazing amount of cases of children who remember a previous life from when they're born. There's no hypnosis involved. And these children can tell you details when they lived, so on, and they can show them old photographs. They can recognize people from their previous life. More common is the ones in the Asian countries where children from when they can speak of a previous life. And in those countries, and most of them are a bit further back, but they were investigated by Professor Stevenson, and where possible and where it's viable, they can take these children to a village. It might be 100 miles away in a small area where they couldn't possibly get. They can take these children to their previous life. They don't give them any clues. In fact, they give them red herrings sometimes. And when the children are old enough, maybe 5, 6, something like that, and these children can take them through the streets, they can take them to the places they lived, and they can recognize people and the correct relationships. So children who remember a previous life certainly show that there's something going on there, that the first consciousness has existed and has come back in another body. Don't panic, everyone. We do not know the nature of consciousness. And consciousness, I feel, doesn't need to be one thing. There's the idea that our individual consciousness are all part of a diamond. The diamond that is Kate, the diamond that is Wendy Zamet. you are manifesting part of your own consciousness in this existence. So it doesn't mean that the first person will never come back. You'll never hear from them. That part that was your husband, your child, whatever, that part is always there. They're linked with you. And that's where the love link is never broken. It doesn't matter what particular life that you're actually in.
Oh.
So we've had the drop-in communicators, which I love. We've got the earthbound, excellent. Children who remember a previous life. Now, there's also another thing. I don't know what you call them. It's become fashionable to call them walk-ins. There's a little boy in India called Jaspir Lal Jat, and when he was about 2.5, he actually died with smallpox. Now, in those countries, they like to bury them within 24 hours. So it was nighttime, and the father sat up all night with the body of Jaspir Lal Jat. And as he sat up all night, grieving his child, he began to notice his finger twitching. And that little boy came back to life. But when he came back to life, he didn't come back as Jaspir Lal Jat. Jaspir Lal Jat was actually gone. And the personality that took over was a man of 26 called Sobaram. Sobaram had been riding a chariot somewhere. Someone had poisoned him. He fell off the chariot and he died just more or less at the moment that Jaspir Lal was leaving his own body. Now, you can call it possession. I don't like that word. You can call it a walk-in. Sobaram, they didn't know this. The family didn't know this, of course, but Sobaram came into the body of this small child. And as the child got older, he wouldn't eat the food that his mother would give him because he was one religion and the family were another. And it just so happened to be that the lady next door, once the child told him what he wanted, she was his religion and she was able to make him his food. Now, Sobaram took over that body of Jaspir Lal Jat for the rest of Jaspir Lal Jat's life. But when he got, the family were very well educated. I think the father was a university lecturer and they didn't really want this to happen. Anyway, when he was old enough, they took him to the place where he said, my name is Sobaram, I live at this place, so on and so forth. When the child was old enough, they took, I'll call him Jaspir Lal Jat, they took Jaspir to Sobaram's town, which was miles away. And once again, he got there, he got to the house, he described what the house would look like before he got there. Now you have to remember that a 26-year-old consciousness is now in the body of a 5-year-old. So he got there as a 5-year-old child and he recognized everybody. He recognized his wife, he recognized his own children, he recognized the whole of the family, and he got every one of the relationships so correct that that family actually recognized that this child was indeed the consciousness of Sobaram. And the body of the child, we'll call him Jasper now, the body of the child stayed with the new family all of the time, but he also kept in touch with the old family, and he was able to differentiate the two. So that is maybe not such a nice story, but it's true, and it actually happened. Then we can look at psychic surgery. I know some people here are healers. I don't know if we have any psychic healers or psychic surgeons. In general terms, it sounds ridiculous, psychic surgery. And there are a few ridiculous people, but there are also the genuine article. And to me, the best proven psychic surgeon was between Chapman and Mr. Chapman that was on the material, and a Dr. Lang that was in Spirit World. And you can read about Chapman and Lang in a book called Healing Hands by J. Bernard Hutton. J. Bernard Hutton was going blind. He was a journalist, and his wife took him along. He was actually going blind. That was the diagnosis. They took him along to his wife dragged him actually along to see Chapman to get spiritual surgery. Now the man hated it. He didn't want to go. He thought it was ridiculous. He thought this was the most ridiculous thing he'd ever seen in his life. And even more so when he was met by an old man in a white coat with his eyes shut, coming towards him and saying, come in, lie down. And the man lay down on the couch. And the actual J. Bernard Hutton, he wanted to laugh. He thought this was just so ridiculous. But as he was lying there, Lang began to work over his body, over his eyes. And he didn't laugh then anymore because he could feel things happening behind his eyes, like little pinpricks and things like that. And gradually he realized something was happening behind his eyes. Now, to cut a long story short, Hutton did get much more sight back. Gradually, of course, it got better and better. And he was so flabbergasted, he decided to investigate Michael Chapman. And he was allowed to go into the records. He checked all the records, and it was 100% people. The other fascinating thing was with we'll call him Mr. Lang. He was a consultant, the one that had died. If you came in to see Mr. Lang, and you had seen him when you were a child, that you would come in maybe as an adult, and he would say to you, Kate, I remember you. You had such and such wrong with your eye as a child, and he recognized the people that came in while he was still alive. So that once again is totally incredible. And his theory was that he worked on the etheric body. He said he worked above the body, he worked on the etheric body and made the changes, and that had the effect on the physical body. As I say, what can't speak can't lie. It's all there in the records. Hutton produced this wonderful book called Healing Hands. You've got to watch, there's a lot of book called Healing Hands, but this one is by J. Bernard Hutton. And to me, this form of psychic surgery, and it can be shown that the people did get better. Now, I know there's charlatans, I know all of that, but I'm only concentrating on the best possible cases. In my last book, I give chapter and verse on this, and I also tell you about studies that have been done in cases by medical doctors, and there are about 1,800, not 1,800 in the book, but there are about 1,800 studies on spiritual healing, which come out all very, very, very positive. Now, another thing, of course, that shows survival of consciousness is good mediumship. And I emphasize the term good mediumship because quite often mediumship is not entirely what it should be these days, as you well know. I did tell you that I went on a lot of spontaneous cases, which I did. We used mediums in that. Sometimes we're very good. But my wow moment, as far as I'm concerned, for personal evidence, was that it was round about 1996, 97. A woman came to me and she told me, I didn't know her, that her daughter had been murdered. And she said, I wonder if I could do anything to help. Well, I knew she wanted a reading with a medium, but I felt if her daughter was murdered, it was too early. So I said to her to bring me an envelope with something that belonged to her daughter in it, and I would take it to several mediums and see if we could get anything about the murderer. The murder had happened seemingly 6 months earlier, and the police weren't getting anywhere at all with it. So I think that's why she came to me. I don't know how she found me, but she did. And so I did take it to 2 or 3 mediums, and they didn't really say very much about it. And then I took it to another medium whom I totally trust and respect. And I was able to go to this person's house. The person was sitting at a table with a computer, smoking a cigarette with one hand, computer in the other. And I said, it was a brown A5 envelope. So I just went in and I plunked the envelope down on the table, and I said, can you tell me what you get from this? And the medium looked at me and said, do I have to? And I went, yeah, you do. So the medium knew me well enough to say, okay, grudgingly, very, very grudgingly. And the medium put the hand down like that, and within a millisecond, said to me, I have a girl here that was murdered. And of course, I don't know the details of the murder. I don't know anything about it at all. And I just went, and of course, I'm recording it and I'm taking notes. He said, she's telling me that her boyfriend, and he named a name, we'll say the boyfriend's name was Gordon, I can't remember it. She said, my boyfriend Gordon was the first to know that I was dead, and he phoned my mum. And I'm writing all this down. She's telling me that she misses her 3 cats. She's telling me that she's got tattoos on her body above her left breast, and you described them. Tattoos behind her right arm, described them and the colours. I don't know if I said it. She's telling me she misses her 3 cats. I might have said that already, which is quite specific. And then he said something that I kind of went, wow, that's either right or wrong. she's telling me that she was in jail and prison when she was younger, and she was in Corntonville prison. And I thought, bloody hell. I thought, that's either right or wrong. I don't know anyone that's been in prison, far less a jail called Corntonville. So once again, I'm writing all this down. She's telling me that when she was younger, she had a termination of a pregnancy. And she's telling me that the news, here again, the news reports of her death, that what she was wearing when she was murdered, were all wrong. Of course, and then she described, she said, it was like a three-way conversation. She's saying I was wearing such and such a top, a grey skirt, boots, etc. There was quite a detail of what she was actually wearing when she was found. Of course, I don't know if it's right or wrong. The medium hadn't a clue. The medium didn't even know her name, which I only knew her first name at that particular time. And so it went on and so on and so on. And the medium actually gave me 29 pieces. Excuse me, my throat's away tonight. The medium actually gave me 29 pieces of specific information, absolutely specific information, 29 pieces. Now, some of the pieces he gave me were about how she was murdered. She said all the injuries were her back. She actually said he put a tea towel around her throat and pulled her backwards, and all her injuries were at the back of her head. Now, I didn't tell the mother that eventually, and he also gave me an address, which I didn't tell and a slight description of the murderer, but no name or anything like that. So I chickened out, so that was fine. Thanked the medium, of course. Went home. I didn't know if it was right or wrong, and I thought, bloody hell, Corntonville prison, that's a showstopper. So anyway, I went home and I transcribed all the stuff onto paper. Oh, that was the other thing. He said, she's telling me that as we speak, her mother has moved her photograph from the top of the mantelpiece to the top of the television. I'm writing that down, that's fine. So 2 days later, I'd arranged to meet the mother in her house, which I'd never been to before. It's not where I live, it's about 20 miles away. So 2 days later, I phoned the mother up, obviously, arranged to go to the house. And as soon as I walked in the door, I saw the photograph of a girl on top of the television. And I said to her, oh, is that your daughter? And she said, yes, I moved that there 2 days ago from the top of the mantelpiece to the top of the television. And I thought, you know, tick mentally, okay. And I had to be very careful here, because all of you who are mediums know you have a great responsibility. And psychical researchers have a great responsibility to be very careful with the people you're talking to. You must be very respectful of where they are, maybe what their grief is, etc., and do nothing to make that any worse. So I said to her, well, I have a list of things that mediums have said to me. Actually, it was only the one medium. That mediums have said to me, and I'm going to read you the list. I'm going to go down the list and read it one by one. And I want you to say if it's right or if it's wrong. Not nearly right, nearly wrong, because I'm a kind of black and white kind of person. I said, tell me if it's right or wrong. So there we started. Oh, that was the first thing he said was she's got medium length brown hair. Well, I could see that in the photograph. So every single thing about the brown hair, the boyfriend being the first to know she died, the cats, 3 cats, yeah. Oh, she lived one up in a flat. She lived one up on the right-hand side. That was right. The tattoos were all right. And I hesitated and I said, your daughter had been in Corntonville prison. She went, yes, that's right. And I thought, oh, gold, you know. I didn't tell her about the pregnancy because I thought you might not have known that she had an abortion, and it's bad enough your daughter is dead. So I didn't ask her that. And so it went on. I gave her 2 pieces, 22 pieces of specific information, and every single one of them was absolutely correct. There was no, the clothes she was found in, all the things I've told you about. I can't remember which book I've got that in. I can check that later and tell Wendy. But to me, that was my wow moment, because I know that's true. I know that's the way it happened. The medium had no notion of who this girl was. I was only thinking the medium would get something from the envelope. In actual fact, all he needed was his first touch of the envelope and all of the information came through. So my point there is the survival of consciousness. That girl knew. Of course, I didn't tell the mother about how the tea towel around the neck or anything like that, but I did establish that all her injuries were down the back. So that was kind of right. But to me, if a thing's not absolutely right, I count it as wrong. So out of the 29 pieces of information, 22 pieces were absolutely correct, totally and utterly specific. Now, in mathematical terms, I've worked it out, Stan. I can't remember the figure, but I've worked it out, and it's an enormous amount of that being due to chance. I mean, there's no way in this world that that's due to chance. So there we have the drop-in communicator, nobody knows, giving information, earthbounds being cleared and that area being clear. We have children who remember a previous life of the consciousness of that other, I nearly said entity, personality. And then we have the psychic surgeons who can definitely, it's not Michael Chapman that's doing the healing, of course. It's Dr. Lang coming through him from spirit. Chapman goes into trance and Lang takes over. In fact, he changes his appearance. He becomes an old man, and he's not an old man. And the interesting thing about the psychic surgery is they often smell ether in the room when they're having the surgery, but of course there's no ether there at all. And I say, you'll have to, for details, you'll have to either read my book, read other people's book, but trust me, this is all absolutely true. So there we have the murdered girl situation. And of course, nowadays, we have electronic voice phenomena, and that's coming on by leaps and bounds. I do cover that, Wendy, in the third book, It's Life and Death, but Not As You Know It. I was going to call it It's Life and Death, Jim, but Not As You Know It, but I was persuaded not to do that because some people wouldn't get the Star Trek inference on that. There are also many spontaneous cases where we get lots of information from mediums about the people who have died. They all seem to be correct. Everybody who, newspapers, television, radio, whatever, when they say, do you believe in afterlife, or is it a story? I say, no, it's not a story. It's an account, and many of them are verifiable. And and as I say, I don't have to believe in a survival of consciousness. I know it's a fact because of these things. What you have to say to the skeptic is, how can you explain these things? And there's no use in telling me that I'm wrong, because many of these things are documented. My own experience, I can only tell you from my own personality, my own truth. This is what happened with the murdered girl. Nothing will change that. And if any of you have ever had, well, you obviously have because you're all here, if you've had a paranormal experience of any kind, you will remember that 5 years from now, 10 years from now. If you live to be 100, you'll still remember that thing because it was so real. It touched your very soul. That is how you can tell if someone is imagining things or not. Now, I deliberately didn't touch on, now I'm not any hypnotherapist, don't shoot me down. I'm not against regression therapy, but you know yourself, there's always a chance of your own personality, your own psychology coming into a regression. But this is why I'm not saying they're not right. They can be right. But for me, it's the children who can remember a previous life from when they were born. That most of you probably know I had a Scottish one as well. But the first book was really born from the experiences it had, while Archie was alive and things we had done together, university stuff. So the lectures were all there. So it was easy to transpose a lot of it into the first book, which I have to say is eminently sensible. The second book shows no imagination. When I called it More Things You Can Do When You're Dead, Wendy asked a question at the beginning. She said, how did you get the title Things You Can Do When You're Dead? Anyway, I wrote the book minus a title, and I said to myself, what is this book about? And I answered myself, well, it's really about things you can do when you're dead. So that's where the title came from. It was my own title. And then the second one, I did that. Now the third one goes on to more bizarre phenomena. And you would really have to read the first 2 books to think that I was sane, because the 3rd book is so bizarre but true. If you read that, you would say, oh, this woman's nuts. But I'm not. It's all true as well. But it's harder to swallow because it's so bizarre, but it's true. Anyway, I digress. Are we going to questions?
Tell us briefly about the experiments you did with the wonderful Gordon Smith.
Well, it wasn't just Gordon Smith.
Right. But tell us about your research on the mediums.
Well,
that was amazing.
Yeah. After as time went on, and I'm very practical, and Archie was very practical. We formed a group called P.R.I.S.M, Psychical Research involving selected mediums, and we teamed up with we wanted 7 psychical researchers, of repute, of which I am one, and we wanted 7 people from at Stansted from the Spiritualist National Union, and we wanted to all get together to try to devise experiments where we could genuinely test mediumship. So we used to go down there 4 times a year, but in actual fact, the idea for the experiment that we did do was actually mine. Now, there was Professor Arthur Ellison, David Fontana, Monty Keane, Archie Roy, can't remember, Maurice Gross, and some people from down there. And I, of my innocence and stupidity, said, well, why don't we just collect statements from mediums and put them into forms, and then we can do these forms with other people. We can put in red herrings for other meetings, etc. Why don't we just do that? And then we can. There must be statements. We can test the accuracy of any particular reading. And Professor Arthur Ellison looked and said, "Oh, surely that must have been done before." And Archie Roy went, "No, it hasn't." Just like that. And that's how it started. Now, we did 5 years work going all over the UK, different places. Now, Anne Harrison can attest to this if she's still there. We would get a venue. We would get the people at the venue. It could be anywhere in England, mostly England actually. They would gather an audience. Well, we did Edinburgh, of course, as well. The people would gather an audience. We wanted 40 people if possible. So that people were taking care of that. I would provide a medium that Archie wouldn't know who the medium was. And when we got to the venue, I was not allowed to go in, and neither was a medium. And Archie would randomly number the seats. And as people come in, they had a shuffle pack of cards, and they were handed a random seat number as they came in. So everybody coming in, they had to sit on the seat they were given, and remember the seats are already randomized. I would be in another room with the medium, and we would have a one-way microphone where the people in the audience could hear what the medium was saying, but we couldn't hear what the audience was saying. So there was no verbal feedback, there was no body language, etc., etc. And we did this all over the UK for 5 years until we built such a database that we showed beyond a shadow of doubt. Now, we didn't know if this was going to work because the mediums can't see anybody, they can't get any feedback. And we ourselves were shocked, really, when we did this. Well, we did the stats. I did the stats with Archie, the simple stuff, and we worked out later that he would take the people who were the intended recipients. See, Archie would maybe say, and he would write it down. He wanted seat number, say 24, 5, 6. He wanted these seats to be the recipients, but we didn't know that. And I would just a knock at the door to say, the first recipient is ready, but the medium and I didn't know who it was. Cutting it short, we had 3 published papers in a peer-reviewed journal of the Journal of the Society for Psychical Research in London, who are very picky, believe me. It's not an old boy system. And cutting it, the odds against the results being due to chance were 1,000,000 to 1. Now, in any scientific experiment, research, these are blooming good odds, I'll tell you. Anne was involved in a charade. Are you still there, Anne? Hi, Anne. Do you remember Archie and I came to Stansted?
Yes, I do.
and this is where Archie and I could get away with a lot of stuff, but people from actual universities can't pretend things. What Archie and I did, we decided to run an experiment just for our own benefit. in which the whole experiment was false. So what I did, I made up sheets from random statements from other experiments. They were false sheets. And I don't know if you remember, Anne, there were 48 people in the room, and the people at this side of the room all got a sheet with NR on it, meaning they were not the recipient. So 24 people had a thing that said they were not a recipient. The people at this side of the room, it was like a school exam. They were all hiding their papers. They were all told that individually they thought they were the recipient of some of the messages. But actually, nobody was a recipient of the messages because the messages were false. I had made them up. But what we're testing was psychology. And where better to test it, Anne, than in Stansted? So the 24 people at that side of the room dutifully filled out all the sheets that we did. It's too complicated to explain here. The people at this side who thought they were recipients, they all filled in their sheets. Honestly, we just said, to the best of your ability, it's either right or it's wrong. So what we did then was, Anne, we split the papers. Archie would take, well, I don't know which one. He took the non-recipients and I took the recipients. It doesn't matter. And then, of course, there was a break. It was probably a lunch break because it would take us some time to do the work. So we went away to another room probably, and we sat and we did individually, we did the stats on the two papers. Now, what we found in our experiments was that each of us, every single one of us, we all share 33% of information. And the average, if there is no medium working, then the people in the audience, nearly everybody can take about a third of what is on a sheet of paper. And if you get a medium that's only scoring 33% accuracy, you can forget it because they're not a medium. That's not good enough. You really class yourself a good medium, you really need to be 60% minimum onwards. The last point in that was there was no difference between the people that thought they were recipients and the people that thought they were non-recipients. Every single person in that whole room came out at 30%.
That's fascinating. Yeah. Fascinating information.